Why is it that some survivors are silenced and shamed, while others are praised, celebrated, and given microphones? Let's dive into that. I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take Two, where I attempt to share my escape from Mormon tradwife life. 6 years ago, October, my Mormon returned missionary husband of 24 years abandoned our family and then began a long, painful divorce of financial devastation, which would eventually lead to me sleeping in my vehicle for about 3 months while my children were homeless, couch surfing with friends, eating out of food pantries, and struggling to just exist while my ex-husband raked in a cool $250,000 a year with his salary at his fancy job. As I went through this very difficult time, struggling at age 44 and then 45 and 46 to take care of the 4 kids that I had full custody and financial responsibility for on a barely associate's degree, never having a real job or any credit or income of my own since I was a 19-year-old girl, I felt like I was the only one who was living this life. And then one of my sisters started to go through the same financial devastation after years being married to a Mormon returned missionary husband and finding herself having to support a family on the other side. And then one of my best friends, and then another friend, and then a neighbor. And as we started dialoguing about the things that were going on in our lives, I realized on the outside we looked okay. We still had the cars and the clothes, and in every way looked relatively privileged on the surface. And yet, all of us were literally starving, unable to pay our bills, and really struggling to carve a path into the future. In this circle of friends, all of us, to some degree, were being stalked, abused, and in other ways victimized by our ex husbands during this post separation period. My situation would become life threatening again and again and again and again, and would continue to destroy my life, my health, and my mental stability, as well as the safety of myself and my children for years. So, one day after having a session with my trauma and abuse therapist, who is trying to help me stay sane during the post separation abuse and financial ruin, I turned on my TikTok and did my first little video about why, at age 46, I was unemployed and homeless because the Mormon church had doctrines and policies and directions that priesthood leaders had given specifically to me throughout my entire life that told women not to be able to provide for themselves financially, that specifically commanded me to be a wife and a mom and nothing else. I also started documenting the 24 years of brutally violent domestic violence that I had experienced. As my following grew, I heard more and more stories from other women who had gone through the same thing that I had gone through. And I realized that the scope of the problem was bigger than I had ever imagined. As I started to hear the stories of thousands and thousands and thousands of other women around the world, I began to realize that young women worldwide, either because of family traditions or religious indoctrination, were being pressured to marry very young without having any financial autonomy or any type of preparation for their economic future, and then have children, stay home, raise babies, which was opening them up to abuse, unhappiness, depression, and eventually, when those marriages ended, as 50% of all marriages do, they were left destitute on the other side. I heard from other women who were the victims of cruel, life-threatening, destructive abuse. And I decided that it was time that somebody started talking about it. And if nobody else was going to talk about it, maybe I should. So I have spent the past 4 years doing magazine articles, interviews, radio shows, podcasts, having my own social medias, producing my own content, writing books, writing Substacks, writing articles. I now have a movie in the works and 2 documentaries that were just filmed about my life, and I have done everything that I can to share the stories of the women around the world who can't share their stories, don't have microphones, or don't have the safety yet to be able to speak out at all. And as I've engaged in this mission, I get constant pushback from people who say something along these lines. Why don't you just move on with your life? You can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. Jake is in your rearview mirror. Stop talking about him. Stop thinking about him. Honey, you need therapy. Why don't you just build a bridge and get over it? Stop talking about it. Stop dwelling on your past. You choose. It's all variations on the same theme. Sit down and shut up. We don't want to hear about. And I think it's really interesting because as human beings, we love survivor stories. We love to hear about somebody who was victimized, traumatized, almost didn't make it, and then they got to the other side. And now here they are talking about the horrible thing that happened over there. And let's not let this happen again, but let's also move forward. But there's one little bubble category of victimization that nobody wants to hear about. And that is specifically women who have been victimized by the patriarchy. You see, I'm not a Holocaust survivor or a breast cancer survivor. I'm not a veteran. I didn't go through something that the men think is a really terrible thing to go through. I survived white, male, religious abuse. And people don't like to hear about that. There's this little sacred bubble over churches. So although my religion almost directly led to the end of my life, when my bishop didn't report that my husband said he was going to unalive me, and the Mormon church all came together to protect him and endanger me, even though my religious experience was life-threatening, people think nice girls don't talk about religion because that's where all the patriarchal power lies. Even though my ex-husband was a brutally violent monster who caused me pain for 24 years and continues at times to antagonize and impact my life. Nice girls don't talk about their ex-husbands. They just find a new one, move on, put a smile on their pretty faces, and shut the hell up. When a woman speaks to power, when a woman shares her story of being abused by one of the white privileged princes in the patriarchy, they tend to tell her to go to the back of the bus. They tend to tell her to shut up. And yet we don't apply this same concept to other victims. I have a friend who spent 6 months in Vietnam, and he didn't even actually go to Vietnam. He was just in boot camp somewhere else. He had a couple of guys in his platoon that were blown up in front of him. It is how many years, 50, 60 years since Vietnam? I don't actually know. It's before I was born. And he still wears full veterans gear to this day. He goes out and does speeches on special holidays. He has the veterans license plate and the hats and the tattoos and all this stuff. Nobody is telling him, sit down, shut up, go to the back of the bus. We don't want to hear your story. Move on, get over it, buddy. In fact, I dare any of you, next time you see somebody in their veterans gear, to go up to them and say, hey, why don't you just move on? Stop wallowing in your past. I was at Walmart here last year, and there was a woman behind me, and she had pink head to toe. The frosty pink hat, t-shirt, pink ribbons everywhere. Her purse was pink. Her keychain was a pink ribbon. And of course, while I'm putting my groceries up, I had to make conversation. And I said, when did you survive breast cancer? Or was it somebody that you loved? And she said, 13 years ago. 13 years later, this woman is still talking about this horrible thing that she survived. And I just wonder if any of you saw her or somebody like her, if you would turn around at the Walmart checkout line and say, buddy, you got to like build a little bridge and get over that. Stop talking about it. Absolutely, definitely not. Men don't like women to talk about other men victimizing women. And while domestic violence survivors and survivors of religious organizations don't have a holiday, a hat, a shirt, I had to make my own, I have a microphone and I am going to use it until there is no longer breath in my lungs. And so should you. That is all. Thank you for watching.